My husband was imprisoned because of my sins, and I cheated on him before his arrival, so I had to face the repercussions. I had always pictured myself living a life that was extravagant and filled with luxury. My job as an information technology specialist in an international company gave me a window into the world of wealth and power, which stoked my yearning for such things. However, as the size of my dreams expanded, so did the scope of my temptations. It started out without any malice. I began stealing little amounts of money from the company's coffers, and I rationalized my actions by saying that it was a way for me to get what I wanted without causing any harm. I saw it as the key that would unlock the door to the life I had always dreamed of having. My self-assurance increased with each successful theft, and the boundaries between right and wrong began to blur for me. My husband observed a shift in my demeanor and commented on it. He had a growing sense of unease over the unexpected stream of cash and questioned her about it as his concerns grew. However, because I was so preoccupied with my recently adopted way of life, I dismissed his concerns with half-hearted explanations and diverting displays of devotion. As the embezzlement went on, I found myself increasingly coming to the conclusion that I had the authority to take anything I desired. My desire for more distorted my judgment, and I convinced myself that I was entitled to the prizes I had accumulated. Any concerns I had about the repercussions of my covert operations were quickly pushed to the back of my mind. I had persuaded myself that there was no way I could be discovered, but the hands of fate had other things in mind for me. When I was enjoying the glory of my ill-gotten earnings on that fateful day, the cops swooped in and took me in for questioning. It was impossible to refute the evidence, and as a result, my entire world came crumbling down around me. I started to feel panicked, and then I recognized the serious error I'd made. I was petrified of giving up all I had worked so hard for, so I went to my husband for help. I broke down in tears as I confronted him with the full scope of my theft and pleaded with him to forgive me for what I had done. I confessed to him that I was terrified of going to jail, and in a selfless display of love, he bore the responsibility for my misdeeds. Moreover, my husband was sentenced to serve a prison term of 5 years. I was able to find peace in the comforting atmosphere of the local cafe. My house had turned into a place full of frightening memories ever since my spouse went to jail for taking the blame for my misdeeds instead of facing the consequences himself. The coffee shop was a haven for me in the midst of a broken world because it allowed me to lose myself in the reassuring scent of freshly made coffee and the soothing buzz of conversation. Because of the frequency with which I frequented the cafe, I first became aware of Damien, who was working as the day shift manager. Our early exchanges consisted solely of brief greetings. However, as time went on, our chats became more in-depth, and the seed was planted for the beginning of a genuine friendship. My anxiety was eased by Damien's sympathetic listening, and I found his kind presence to be a great source of solace. We discussed our histories, aspirations, and even the challenges that each of us had encountered in our own lives. Except for the theft I committed since I lied to him and told him that my husband was the one who stole the money and that he was currently serving his sentence in jail. I lied because I did not want him to have the wrong impression of me. I had grown to enjoy his company and did not want to risk losing it under any circumstances, so I did what I needed to in order to maintain our relationship. During this trying time in my life, I took comfort in his companionship because of the unmistakable bond that existed between us that went beyond that of simple friendship. Initially, I went to see my husband in jail once a week. My husband insisted that I lead a normal life and that we would start living together soon. He said it was just a matter of time. I told him that it was getting harder to live without him. However, as my friendship with Damien grew stronger, I began to skip the visits. My husband thought that I had finally moved on to a normal life. I was still recovering from the wounds that had been caused by my past, and I had conflicting emotions. I treasured the bond I had with Damien and enjoyed the support he offered, but I also struggled with the guilt of maybe betraying the sacrifice made by my husband. I needed to confront my feelings. I found myself in a challenging situation, torn between two confessions that were in direct opposition to one another. I was at a crossroads, and I couldn't decide whether or not I should see my husband in jail and explain my increasing tendency for another man, or whether or not I should immediately confess my sentiments to the other man. I was aware that being truthful was the most important thing, but I couldn't bring myself to speak my mind out of anxiety about the consequences. I gave careful consideration to the outcomes that could result from either choice and was aware of the potential harm that could be brought on by my choices. One evening, I decided to see my husband, even though it had been 3 weeks since the last time I had seen him, and I had finally made up my mind to tell him the truth about everything. I felt that he deserved to be aware of the situation. I was getting ready for my visit tomorrow morning when, all of a sudden, my doorbell started to ring. When I answered, it was Damien who was standing in my doorway, looking so worried. I asked him if he was okay, and then offered to come in, and when he came inside, he grabbed me, shoved me into the corner, and laid out his heart in front of me. I was forced to betray my husband because I lost control of the situation, which ended up occurring despite my efforts to prevent it. When Damien started sleeping next to me, I reconsidered whether or not I should inform my husband about my feelings for another guy. I reasoned that my husband would never find out about my affair while he was in jail, so there was no need to tell him about it. I was the only one who visited him. My affair with Damien began reluctantly, but then gradually I learned to suppress my guilt over my pleasure, just as I had done in the past. However, I had not learned a lesson because I had not suffered, and I let my husband suffer for my wrongdoings. It had been months since I had seen my husband, since I had allowed myself to become immersed in my new endeavor to the point where I was unaware of the amount of time that had passed. I went to the prison to see my husband after it had been months, and while I was there, I learned that he had been released from custody as of the previous month. When I asked them how that could have happened, they told me that due to his excellent behavior, his term had been reduced and he had been freed on parole. I was stunned when they told me that. While I was driving back, I couldn't help but wonder why, if my husband had been freed, he hadn't made the trip back to our house to see me right away. My husband was waiting for me in the hallway as I stepped into our home. My heart skipped a beat when I saw him there. As soon as I recognized his familiar face, the first wave of anxiety and confusion that I had experienced quickly vanished. After the time that we had spent away, I felt an overwhelming desire to give him a big hug, so I hurried over to him as quickly as I could. However, as I extended my arms in the direction of my husband, hoping to feel the comforting embrace of his arms, I observed a shift in his manner. I was left standing there, trapped in a moment of uncertainty, as his arms stayed at their sides. He did not move them, as I attempted to make sense of his unresponsive standing. My husband started telling me his story after taking a few deep breaths. He confessed that while he was gone, he had come across some troubling facts that he had discovered, a piece of information that had damaged his trust and put our relationship's basis to the test. I stepped back because I could see where this conversation was going, and I am also familiar with his rage, so the instant I was walking back and trying to run, he grabbed me and started beating me. I don't recall how many times he hit me and struck me in the stomach, but he kept saying the same thing over and over again, which was, "How could you?" And he did not allow me the opportunity to explain what happened from my point of view. I had reached the point where I had given up and accepted the fact that my husband was going to end my life today. I stopped fighting it and began waiting for my last breath, but then Damien came along and showed me that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. He then raced towards me and shoved my husband so hard that he fell to the ground. After that, he scooped me up and started rubbing my bruises, but then my husband attacked him as well, but Damien gave him a difficult time. Then my husband raged at him, telling him that the woman for whom he had fought once was someone he loved very much, and that in return she had deceived him. He had taken responsibility for her wrongdoings because he loved her so much. Damien appeared confused, and then he looked at me, but I was not in the right frame of mind to address my lies at the time. In fact, that was the last thing I remembered hearing before passing out. When I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital, and Damien was sitting right next to me. He was carrying some documents. The instant that my eyes landed on him, a wave of remorse and shame washed over me, distracting me from the excruciating pain I was experiencing in my body. Before I could say anything, he cleared his throat and informed me that he had filed charges against my husband for the violence that he had committed against me, and that my husband is currently in jail for those charges. However, my husband had also served me with the divorce papers, and Damien was waiting for me to come to my senses so that he could end this relationship because I had built the basis of our relationship on lies. He can't stay with someone he doesn't trust, and after discovering my lies, he can't trust me anymore, so he kept the papers and went away, leaving me all alone in my life. I was the one to blame for damaging my own life as a slave to my greed, first for money and then for lust.